Well, on Rethink Real Estate today, we are talking about the perception of distress when it comes to auction. I just want to put it out there that this is one of the things that I wanted you guys to have a deeper understanding of, because it's one of the things that a seller will often bring up when you talk to them about auction. How do you get around the perception of distress? And I want you to understand in this episode, I go into it a little bit deeper, is that this is the ultimate goal when it comes to your real estate transaction, in the sense of getting higher volumes of people through the door. Okay, making sure that the marketing that you're doing has greater effect. Okay, because the perception of distress gives a perception of a deal, and I've never met somebody that wants to overpay for good real estate. Hopefully it breaks it down for you and gives you an understanding of leaning into the discomfort of distress. Okay, there's a deeper reason why a seller is saying it as well. Possibly could be ego, perception, whatever you want to say, and how we handle that. Thanks so much. Welcome to Rethink Real Estate. My name is Ben Brady, and this is a real estate podcast aimed to deliver sales strategies, marketing tips, and business insights from industry experts and myself to build a listing-focused business for the future. Let's get into it. Well, distressed, auction. I often say auction's a dirty word when it comes to real estate. That's one of the things I say when I'm talking to somebody or in a presentation to a seller or whatever it is. This is the part where the funniest thing that, the funniest thing. The thing that I don't understand when we come to talking about auction is that people are like, I don't want my property to look distressed. Now, I totally get that. But from an ego perspective, I get that from I don't want my neighbors to think that, I don't want my friends and family to think that, I don't want any of those people to think that. And one of our common things that when it comes to doing a listing presentation to a seller is that, hey, it is our responsibility that when your property comes on the marketplace as an auction, in order to inform your neighborhood, inform the people around you, and we can even speak to your friends and family as well around the process itself. And we can give you a presentation to give them as well, because we would love you to pass it on, because it gives you a talking point. And when you explain what you're doing, it's so logical that in essence is that we would hope that they would use it on their property. So therefore it might be more business for us. And it's the same with your neighbors and your marketplace as well. We need to explain it to them so that they understand it and gives us a talking point. It gives us an opportunity to meet more people, right? However, the part that I don't understand is that our primary role is to get the highest volume of people through the front door of your property. So if there's a perception of distress, okay, or the perception of that they could possibly get a deal. I don't like to say distress. Let's say that it's just the perception that there possibly could be a deal on the horizon, okay? The reality is that we get a high volume of people through the front door. And I've often explained, and I've done this on the podcast before, we've explained the perfect contradiction. Auction is the perfect contradiction to deal with a contradicting real estate transaction. I'll quickly go over it again for those that haven't heard it before and might be new to the podcast, is that we say that auction is the perfect contradiction to a contradicting real estate transaction. And it's a bit of a moment where you sort of get a head tilt from the sellers and go, what do you mean? Is that, well, let's say that we put a sign out the front of your property and we said that, we said your situation. You don't need to sell, if you'll only sell if you get your price, so on and so forth. Let's say that sign out the front of the property said, don't come in unless you're a serious buyer that will pay us this much money, okay, because we don't need to sell it. If we don't get that price, we're not going to sell it. We're not forced to sell. We're in no rush. No one would walk in the door. They don't want to go into it and get involved in a transaction that is ultimately them with the perception that they will overpay or whatever it may be, or it won't be easy. Now, for some reason, we put the word auction out the front of a property. We could even frame it as luxury auction, and it still gets 51% more people through the front door than what we get on traditional sales. We get over 1,000% more online hits. And the reality is because of a few things. One is the way that we price the property with a bidding to start from that attracts the highest volume of people to the door as possible. Secondly, is that, the other part about it is the perception of getting a deal. Now, auction is a confusing word. There's no question about it. Okay, because the auction process does, certainly have this negative connotation about it from all of the distress sales that happened in 2008 or those years that surrounded that and years that came after that, is that courthouse steps, not being able to look at the property, no due diligence on it, not being able to, do any type of real research, not knowing what liens are on title. Yes, auction is a word in that way in the distress marketplace where definitely it is confusing and the general public really don't like it or don't understand it. But if you use the word auction and you pair it with full disclosure, beautiful marketing, the ability to see the property, and then also the opportunity to walk them through the process and give them the understanding that they will have the opportunity to be competing in a transparent environment, realistically, auction then becomes this perfect culmination in order to get the highest volume of people through, but making them comfortable with the transaction at the same time. Because we give them an opportunity also to place an offer prior to auction to try and stop the auction, that gives them an element of control. Let me give it to you this way. When you give somebody an opportunity to do something like that, stop the auction before getting to auction day, did you know that 70% of elevators in buildings, the button to close the door doesn't actually work? Okay, they only put that button there as an element of control to make you feel more comfortable. So maybe that's what we've done with I've just made that up and draw a parallel to it. Okay, when I say I've just made that up, I heard it on another podcast, may or may not be real, sounds good. And at the end of the day, that's kind of the philosophy that I'm saying why we did that with auction, just trying to make ourselves look smarter than what we are. However, continuing on, auction being the perfect contradiction to a contradicting transaction, okay? Because if we put a sign out the front of your property saying you didn't need to sell it, you only will sell it for a certain price and you're in no rush to do it, no one walks through the door. But we put auction out the front of the property, we put a deadline on when that's going to happen, we give full disclosure, and we get a high volume of people through the front door of that property, 51% more people to be exact. Now, it's called feeding the greed. We've got to feed the greed, and then we've got to manage the greed, because we manage greed, okay, on a buyer's behalf, fear on a seller's behalf, okay? Now, that said, is that we're managing greed, okay, but then we're by feeding the greed, and then we're managing it by a set date and time, making sure they see the high volume of other competition with the social validation, full disclosure, the ability to place offers prior to auction. So therefore, there is a very provocative sale at that point. Okay. So when auction has that distressed persona, we want to lean into that because it gets higher volumes of people through, gives us more competition. Our primary role is just to get them to the property. Could be the best realtor in the world, but if you've got no one to talk to, you are absolutely useless. And it gets higher volume of people through the front door, therefore creating a higher volume of competition. And it works in reverse then. Just getting them there. You need to have a perception of getting a deal. Okay? You need to give a perception of getting a deal to get people to the front door. I've never met anybody in real estate that wants to overpay, that will willingly, when they're leading into the process of choosing to buy. And this is where I want to sort of round out the point, is buyers always start off their search, okay, in a logical fashion, okay? That they always start off with this element of logic that I want to buy the best property for the cheapest price. I don't want to overpay. I really want to make sure that I stay within my budget. But they always end the transaction in an emotional sense. Always end the transaction in an emotional sense if it is actually their primary residence, second home. And I could even argue with you that I've seen commercial people pay way over what they should based on value per square foot or rent per square foot or whatever it may be in that commercial space where they say there's no emotion. There might not be emotion, but there's ego. Whatever words do you want to use in that emotional standpoint is that is what we are provoking. Okay. Now, some people say, well, isn't this manipulation? No, we're giving people an opportunity to see something and then giving them the opportunity to then make a decision that therefore they're in control of. Okay. And the thing that I really want to make sure of is that you understand is that every time where somebody is going to say that, hey, isn't there a perception of distress? It means that they're worried about what people will think of them, which is fine. Okay. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but you've got to give them the utmost confidence to say that, hey, it's our responsibility to communicate with everybody around you. I would be happy to call through anybody that you would want me to explain the process. We could present it to your friends or family. That just gives me an opportunity to connect with them as well. And I've seen many, many agents that are doing auctions do information nights or, a neighborhood open house and just give a pitch around why we're using auction and inviting them to them. The future business that comes from that is absolutely tremendous, guys. So where I'm going with this, lean into the concept that it possibly looks distressed. Lean into the concept of saying to a seller, yes, that's what we want, okay? Because most people have said to me, well, how do we get around the perspective of distress? Is that, hey, I hope that it stays with distress. That's why we get higher volumes of people online through the property. And that's where we can create atmosphere, okay, social validation that gets us the highest and best price so that then we can put them in the perspective of competition. Final theory on it, okay? Traditionally, listing a property is like casting one fishing line into the marketplace with one hook waiting for whatever it is to bite. Now, when that fish bites, you bring it in, okay, you're kind of stuck with it. With auction, it's very different philosophy. We use a net in that same market. We bring the net in, we throw the net out, we bring the net in, and then we pick and choose what and who we would like to deal with in those environments, okay? Because again, yes, does auction bring some people that are not desirable in a perspective of getting the highest and best price? Absolutely it does, okay? It has to. That's the concept. You cast the net out, but then you pick and choose who you would like to deal with at that point. And I need to make sure something is very clear. People don't walk around with their budgets stapled to the back of their head or to their forehead going, this is how much I have to pay. Another person in a house is more competition for the buyer that wants it, and there's social validation. Okay, I've mentioned this a few times on the podcast. You know, I live in Newport Beach. Why are there so many Range Rovers and G-Wagons and whatever you want to call it around here? Okay, social validation, because technically a G-Wagon is actually quite a crappy car, but social validation because there's everyone else that's got them. They must be good. Okay, there is social validation is still a very big thing when it comes to real estate. Hopefully this is giving you an understanding of why we need to lean into a little bit more of the perception of distress with auction. Lean into it as a marketing strategy where it's going to emphasize everything we do rather than just dealing with a small portion of the marketplace. Thanks so much. So about 75% of our audience hasn't liked, followed, or subscribed to our podcast. It would mean the world to us, and it would help this podcast more than you know to expand our reach if you were to like, follow, or subscribe on any of the platforms that you're watching or listening on. Thanks again.